Good morning and welcome to Waste Planning for Non-Waste Not Planner. It's part of the RTPI Online Series 2020 brought to you by the RTPI South East. My name is Jeffrey and I'm the members of the Regional Management Board of the RTPI South East and today's chair. Today is the first virtual waste planning event, and today we are very pleasure to have three very great speakers to talk about waste planning from a different perspective, covering a wide range of topics. For those of you who are first time using the GoToWebinar software, there's a chat function within your control panel. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentations, as we will have a Q&A section at the end. You can also find the links to RTPI works and also the speakers' work related to this section in the downloaded PDF, which is under the handout function in the control panel. Just a friendly reminder, if you guys have any technical, you should be all muted, but if any technical questions, you can feel free to put in the chat box so we will know the IT issues going on there. Right. So before we move on, we would like to do a very short poll to understand the background of our delegates. So I think my colleagues is now preparing the pool now. So here we are. So the first question would be, can you guys tell us a bit more about the background? You guys there. Right, I think it's almost there. So we see, well, we have quite a wide range of our delegates, which is all from is a non-waste planner working for the public sector, but we do have some planners from is a waste planner as well. So we see that's how wide range of delegates we have. So we move on to our next questions to see what is your understanding of waste planning. I think we can start. Right. So thank you for all your participation. So I think that, I mean, most of you guys may want to know a bit more about waste planning in this webinar. So we move on then. Our first speaker today's webinar will be Ian Blake. So Ian has over 30 years of experience in the field of waste management and waste and minerals planning, and he's a partner in BPP Consulting, which is a mineral waste planning consultancy. Ian has also helped many planning authorities across England preparing planning policy concerned with waste management and minerals supply. He also offers advice on all aspects of plan making, including project management, evidence-based preparation, policy development, and examination. Ian also is a chairs the Southeast Waste Planning Advisory Group and lectures all mineral waste planning to students on planning course at the University of Brighton and University of Kent. He is also an associate consultant with Planning Officer Society Enterprises, and in his capacity support the Planning Officer Social Minerals and Waste Learning Group. So today, Ian will provide an introductory overview of waste management and the key factors affecting the related use of land and how these are addressed by the planning system. So I now hand over to Ian.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. Delighted that there's so many of you attending today. I think when we set this up, we were keen to perhaps fill a gap in planners' knowledge around waste planning. It's one of the topics that doesn't get much of a mention on university planning courses. So hopefully, yeah, by the end of today, you'll know a little bit more. We're going to rattle through some presentations, but I think it's going to be on YouTube later. So if you've missed anything, you can go back and enjoy it at your leisure at a later time. So anyway, I will crack on. Basically, I'm just going to set the scene, talk about some key aspects of waste management, and kind of make sure we're all on the same page to start with. So kicking off, what is waste? It might sound like an easy question to answer, but in fact, it's something that's been debated in courts over many years. There's a government DEFRA document on the guidance related to the definition of waste, which runs to nearly 70 pages. So that gives you kind of an idea that it's an area of it's not as straightforward as it may seem. Perhaps the easiest way to think of it, though, in terms that we consider in waste planning, is it's something that's in the eyes of the holder. So if it's something that you choose to discard, you intend to discard, or you actually discard, then it's waste. And that's a definition set out in the the Waste Framework Directive, which is something we've taken on board in the UK. Main types of waste that we're concerned with, each of these have different characteristics, so they have to be managed in different ways, and that's why we make a distinction between them. The household waste, clearly that's waste from households, waste that goes into household waste sites, commercial industrial waste, waste from businesses, offices, shops, and industrial waste, from industry, basically, which has quite a different characteristic to household and commercial waste, which together are often termed municipal waste. Construction, demolition, excavation waste is self-explanatory. Radioactive waste, we don't, as waste planners, deal with all forms of waste planning, but we deal with low-level waste and very low-level radioactive waste. Agricultural waste, waste from agricultural units, hazardous waste, which is by its nature toxic or by its quantity can cause issues. And then finally, not forgetting wastewater. As waste planners, we're also concerned with the treatment of wastewater. In terms of quantities, this is the kinds of quantities that we're dealing with, quite significant. And the majority of the waste around that we're planning for is construction and demolition waste. So that's covered by mineral waste and soils. Perhaps as you'd expect, that'd be the biggest quantity, certainly by weight. Then going down, you've got various other different types of waste: wood waste, glass waste, plastic waste. I mean, it's fair to say that those would also appear in household waste as well. So the household and similar waste is a mixed waste stream. In terms of the flows of materials and resources through the UK, this slide shows you how this actually works. So we've got raw materials coming in on the left-hand side, which are manufactured into products, and then we create things, we use things with those materials, and then some of those may end up as stock. So, for example, materials may end up in infrastructure, may end up in housing, but then there's waste. So the waste is the red flow going over to the right-hand side, some of which is recycled, and that's the blue flow going all the way back round. But some does end up in final disposal by landfill, incineration, and other forms of management. So that basically gives you a feel for how waste is moving through the economy. This slide is a little bit more detailed and shows you different types of facility and how waste flows through our communities into different types of facilities, from housing, from offices, from factories. But basically, there are lots of different types of waste management facility. Just a few slides there to show you some various examples. Construction demolition waste is on the top left, then you've got in-vessel composting in the middle, anaerobic digestion top right. The slide on the middle left shows the interior of a materials recovery facility in Brighton. The slide on the right, of course, is landfill. Not forgetting landfill. That's still happening, and it always will. There'll always be a need for landfill. That picture is a picture of the final landfill in East Sussex. Actually, there are no more household waste or biodegradable waste landfills in East Sussex. That was at Pebsham in Hastings. Bottom left is an incinerator, so that's Grundon's incinerator at Lakeside, just off the M25. If you go around that way, you may recognise the two stacks there, which are quite distinctive. And then on the right-hand side, there's a wastewater treatment facility. So key issues, similar to many other types of large development, but in particular, perhaps we pay particular attention to how waste management there's a risks that it can produce pollution. So we pay extra attention to that particular matter. The other thing I think is worth pointing out there is transport. So we're dealing with bulk materials. So waste planning may often involve bulking up wastes to reduce transport, but it can also lend itself to transport by road and by rail and water. Perhaps one point that James may touch on later is viability and how waste sometimes struggle to compete with other high value land uses. Especially in urban areas, which can make it hard to find suitable sites. Finally, of course, climate change. You mustn't forget, waste management has a role to play in ensuring that we mitigate and adapt to climate change. And one example of that is how we're looking to ensure that energy from waste facilities are utilising heat, and so the energy production is maximum efficiency. So you'll no doubt be aware waste is controversial. People have a perception that it's noisy, smelly, dirty. So if you propose a waste site in any area, you tend to get quite a strong community reaction to it. What that means is the politicians, the local members, can also take a great interest in this, and that will have an impact on how planning applications and waste local plans, local planning policy on waste progresses. In terms of the policy context, these are the key documents I guess that you need to be aware of. And in particular, I draw your attention to the National Planning Policy for Waste. It's the only area of development that has its separate planning policy. So it's separate from the National Planning Policy framework, for better or worse. But nevertheless, it does have it's on its own, so you may not have actually referred to it. There is planning practice guidance on waste as well, which I recommend you also have a look at. It's 21 pages of guidance there, which is very, very useful. So in terms of waste planning, what do we do? How do we approach it? I mean, the key elements are preparing local plans, waste local plans in particular. So those are prepared by county, unitary authorities, metropolitan areas, and those set out where and how waste should be managed, over a 15-year period, much like a standard local plan. In some cases, local plans include their own waste policies in the case of unitary authorities. Planning applications, waste facilities, as with any other form of development, you need to apply for planning permission. Frequently, environmental impact assessments are required to be submitted with such planning applications because they may be quite large. One of the key conundrums of a waste planner spends much of their life agonising over It's identifying a future need for waste management capacity. So how much capacity is there? What's going to be needed in future? And is additional capacity needed? Site identification also presents a particular challenge. Trying to find sites within urban areas, as I said before, where it's competing with other uses isn't always easy. Now, one of the things that I noticed was there's a lot of people here from non-waste planning authorities. So you guys have a role in waste planning. The planning practice guidance is very clear and sets out a whole raft of areas that the local planning authorities have to take in terms of implementing the waste hierarchy, but also in site identification. So where local planning authorities are identifying sites, they shouldn't rule out the possibility that waste management uses could be located, for example, in industrial areas. The other key area is safeguarding. So that's ensuring that new development doesn't come forward in a way which will hinder the operations of the existing waste management facility along the lines of the Agent for Change provisions in the National Planning Policy Framework. And finally, waste management associated with development. So this is ensuring that as new development comes forward, waste management is taken into account, ensuring that sufficient storage and collection systems are in place to maximise recycling and sustainable waste management. Finally, I'll mention circular economy very briefly because Victoria is going to talk about this in more detail. But this is an emerging area. We recently had an announcement last week from the government about a circular economy package, which is following Europe. But it's great to see that steps are now being taken to look at the management of waste further up the waste hierarchy. So that's looking at prevention, reuse, repair, those kinds of activities which are most beneficial when it comes to waste management. So finally, I just want to draw your attention to what I see are the main characteristics of waste and waste planning, which may perhaps differentiate it from the general planning. So it's a fascinating area, and yeah, I hope you get involved and enjoy the challenge. So yeah, thank you. That's me. Back to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. I always found it's a challenge for the first speaker because Ian has to use just 10 minutes time to introduce the whole waste planning sector. But I think I understand there's a majority of our delegates are all on waste planners. So I think throughout, Ian's presentation, you will have a bit more understanding on what waste planning is. And also thank you, Ian, for introducing some of the topics will be covered by Victoria. So now we move on to the next speakers, Victoria Manning. Victoria is a chartered town planner specialist in waste planning. She currently works for 7 North London boroughs on North London Waste Plan, and also as a freelance waste planning consultant for Vitaka Consulting. She has contributed to waste local plans and policies across London, the South East and beyond. Victoria has also particular expertise in London-specific planning issues, and she is also the chair of the London Waste Planning Forum. So Victoria, today we talk about the importance of the duty to cooperate in waste planning and how to incorporate circular economic principles into planning and the built environment. So now I hand over to Victoria.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. Hello, everyone. Like Ian, I'm delighted to see so many of you. I'm going to talk to you about 2 things today: the duty to cooperate in the circular economy, and as non-waste planners, these may well be how you find yourself dealing with waste planning. So duty to cooperate, I'm sure many of you will have heard of the duty to cooperate. Some of you will no doubt have carried out the duty to cooperate. Some of you may even have received a letter talking about waste imports to your area, and you won't have the faintest idea what the letter is talking about. So let's remind ourselves what the duty to cooperate is. It came into effect in 2011 through the Localism Act, and it effectively replaced regional or strategic planning, which is a bit of a problem for waste because waste is much better planned for on a regional level. It is a duty to engage constructively, actively, and on an ongoing basis, and it relates to strategic cross-boundary matters, which of course includes waste. The duty to cooperate is carried out by policy planners as part of local plan development, and it's demonstrated through statements of common ground. So why is the duty to cooperate important in waste planning? Well, firstly, it's an issue of soundness. So plans are sound if they're based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters. And waste does indeed cross administrative boundaries, and it will do that to go to the most appropriate or the cheapest or whatever contracted facility. So while local plans seek net self-sufficiency, and by net self-sufficiency I mean planning for capacity to manage the equivalent of 100% of waste arising in a particular area, local plans can't really do much to influence where waste is managed. Duty to cooperate is also a really good opportunity to understand the regional picture in the absence of regional planning. So how do you go about duty to cooperate in waste planning? So first of all, you identify your main recipients of strategic amounts of waste for your area. The sources of this are the waste data interrogator, hazardous waste data interrogator, and incinerator returns. And all of these are publicly available data sources from the Environment Agency, but it does require some technical expertise in this area. How much waste is strategic? Well, in the wider South East, we've adopted some thresholds to indicate what strategic might look like, and they're set out there. And these thresholds capture the majority of waste exports. If you don't employ these thresholds, you end up writing to 70 or 80 separate local authorities, and nobody wants that. So if you receive a letter, duty to cooperate letter about waste, what you need to do is, if you're going to write to somebody, find out what your each main recipient of significant waste from your area is. So you will set out the thresholds, you will ask for agreement on these thresholds. In the wider South East, that's probably an acceptable place. Set out the waste flows, so tons over the past few years. It's quite good to do over a series of years, because then you can identify trends and anomalies, and you can seek agreement of that data. Now that does rely on some expertise in waste data. At the local authority you're writing to, and often that isn't the case. You can ask if there are any planning constraints to continue and how much waste will continue to be exported, and normally that's roughly what's happening at the moment. You'll seek endorsement for all of that, and you'll identify any areas of contention. Now, waste is politically unpopular, and statements of common ground are signed by members, so it's better to stick to a fact-based exercise in order to avoid any controversy. Now, that's a whistle-stop tour for the duty to cooperate, and I suppose my main message is that if you receive a duty to cooperate letter and you haven't the faintest idea what's being asked of you, please get in touch with the sender, because the waste planning authorities will be more than happy to help you out and to respond to those. Now I'm going to talk to you about the circular economy. The circular economy is a very big, broad topic area, so I'm going to focus in on the built environment. The circular economy is essentially environmental, social and economic sustainability. So we're talking about preserving and optimizing resources, reducing consumption and minimizing waste, and actually designing out waste, and by doing so, reducing costs. There are lots of regulation to help us embed the circular economy. Ian mentioned earlier about the European Circular Economy Package, and these include things like carbon reduction targets, recycling targets, and landfill diversion targets. Now, the circular economy is politically popular, so this is where you can get your members and your local communities on board with waste planning. So this is a diagram just setting out the circular economy. So we want to move from a linear system, which is make, use, discard, and try and extract the use value from these things. So reusing something will avoid extracting natural resources, and also reusing something will avoid disposal at the other end. So how do we go about embedding circular economy principles in the built environment as planners? So development by its very nature will generate waste and generate carbon emissions. And we are seeking to reduce, in this particular case, construction, demolition and excavation waste, and also reduce carbon emissions. So the first thing is, can we retain and repurpose an existing building? Because by doing so, we will reduce waste and reduce carbon emissions. If we can't do that and we're designing a new building, can we design it for flexible use so that it can be adaptable depending on the user? So if the occupier leaves, can a new occupier move in and use the building? When we're designing new buildings, we need to be able to design them so that we can disassemble and reuse or recycle their component parts, and that needs to be easy to do. If we are demolishing an existing building, we want to be able to reuse and recycle as much of that demolition material as possible, if possible on site, but if not off site. And we also have to consider the end user. So we want to enable better recycling of household and commercial waste, depending on the use of the building, and also designing in adequate storage to support that recycling. Now, this is a flow diagram from a draft circular economy statement guidance from the GLA. Now, hopefully you will have a link to this document, and it's certainly worth looking at. But this flow chart takes you through what I just described. So it starts off, is there an existing building on the site? If yes, it takes you through, is it technically feasible and viable to retain the building in whole or in part? So it's quite a useful tool to analyse what your options are on a particular site. So how do we go about designing in adequate storage to support recycling? Well, first of all, space in kitchens. I mean, how many of us have kitchens large enough to accommodate separate recycling of food, separate storage of food, recycling and residual waste? Very few of us, but we can build those in, we can design that in so it encourages recycling. In terms of the collection regime, if it's curbside collection for an individual house, that's great, there's sufficient storage capacity. But if it's in a high density building, so flats, you need to design in accessible, secure communal collection bin storage, and also communal storage for bulky waste. Because how many times have you seen a mattress discarded on the side because, waiting for the council to come and collect it? In addition to residential units, ideally commercial units also need individual separate communal separate space for recycling food waste and residual waste, because often there needs to be sufficient space to do that as well. All of this is very difficult to retrofit into older buildings, and that is a problem when trying to support recycling. And finally, just a word on mass collection systems. Now, these are suited to very large scale developments, and there are vacuum systems. So the picture on the left-hand side is separate residual food and recycling. And this is in Wembley, which has one major landowner, so they're able to do this. And so you put your waste in, it gets sucked along a tube to a compressor at the other end, and then the vehicle can come and collect it from there. On the right-hand side, this is underground storage. So if you're in an area which is very short of space, in this particular case, it's Tower Hamlets, I think, underground storage is an excellent solution. Now, these types of mass collection systems produce much better results for recycling, but they do have much higher upfront costs and also ongoing costs, things like communications, maintenance, and also you need special collection vehicles. Now, that's a whistle-stop tour through the circular economy. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think it is a very good presentation regarding on the duty to cooperate in waste planning. I think so. It's a challenging and it's a common issues, I think, recently and nowadays as well. For those of you, I think you're still attending the webinar, please feel free to ask questions by using the chat function, and we will have a Q&A section at the end. And just have a bit of a reminder, I mean, during the Victoria presentation, Victoria mentioned about there's a documents about the circular economic statement guidance, and it's appear in the handout stage, which you can download from the handout section in the control panel, which is a PDF. So feel free to download the document. I find it will be useful for you guys to have some additional materials on the topics. So the last but not least, we move on to James Stewart Irvine. James is a planning manager of Biffa Waste Management, and he has a background in both private and public sectors, and extensive experience in major waste minerals, commercial, employment, and residential development projects. James has also developed an extensive understanding of EIA, waste management, waste policy and regulation, project management, and stakeholders communication. James is a member of Waste Advisory Groups, and he's also a representative of Environmental Services Association. So today, James will provide an industry perspective of planning and waste management, providing an insight into Biffa's interactions with the planning system, illustrated with case studies. And also he will discuss how the industry and the planning system have responded to the current COVID-19 pandemic. So now I hand over to James.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey, and good morning, everybody. And just to echo what Victoria and Ian said, yeah, welcome, and it's really good to see so many people attending the conference, and from different backgrounds and levels of experience, and from all over the country. So as Jeffrey mentions, I'm just going to give a bit of an industry perspective about how we interact with the planning system, and just by way of a brief agenda, I'll give an overview to Biffa, and we'll have a look at planning and waste. And also how the coronavirus has impacted upon the industry. So Biffa was founded in 1912, originally as a haulage company for coal before we diversified into waste in the 90s and 60s. We've been through 2 ownerships, and most recently in October 2016, we became listed on the London Stock Exchange, and we're the UK's largest and leading integrated waste management company. We operate across over 190 locations and a range of treatment and disposal technologies, including landfill, soil treatment, anaerobic digestion, plastics, polymers recycling. We have a number of depots and also landfill sites as well. We also publish a series of market research papers. I won't go into these in too much detail. They're all available on our website. But most recently, we published our sustainability strategy, which outlines our future approach to delivering the circular economy, carbon reduction, and other measures that will enable us to continue to contribute to the sustainable management of waste. So Biffa and the planning system, well, actually we have a very, very good relationship with the planning system. Typically we can expect around 80 consents per year. That includes both planning and permitting consents, and I'll come on to permitting shortly. But those consents are a means to an end, and they're certainly not an end, and we're always seeking to diversify in order to meet the demands of the market. And so that we can ensure our assets are fully utilised. We focus quite heavily on relationship building in the local community. The previous speakers have mentioned that it can be very contentious locally, but we have a series of liaison groups. We do volunteering days, site tours, school tours, all trying to help build up a better understanding of the way that waste is managed and the technology that is used to do so. I think typical issues that we come across is to do with over control in planning conditions, always seeking more flexibility where possible. The market often demands that, but it's obviously very locationally specific. But it's particularly important as we're moving towards a more circular economy to try and help to promote greater flexibility and technological innovation. So why do we plan ahead? We're actually a speculative industry. We have little or no land bank, and generally speaking, the market will determine where the waste is managed. But we're guided by policies and local plans. County authorities produce the minerals and waste plans, but then we're also looking at the borough and district plans too for allocations such as in industrial areas. So, but generally speaking, applications for new sites will come forward on unallocated land unless they're part of a wider strategic waste management facility. The timescales for local plan reviews, say every 5 years, tend not to align with future proposals for waste, which tend to be on a shorter timescale. And alongside the planning regime, we also have to deal with the permitting regime. So we're quite risk averse, and there's a lot of upfront costs, and the complexity of the regulatory structures do pose some risks to development. So we want to be fairly certain that developments are going to be going ahead. So just a couple of case studies to illustrate some of these points. I mentioned that the waste industry responds to demands, and we're always innovating to find solutions, and not all of those solutions will be traditional, and there may well be new emerging technologies which will be playing a part to meet the demands of climate change and the circular economy, and the planning system is absolutely key to delivering that innovation. Now, this is an example of our polymers part of our business, which is the plastics recycling. We have an existing plant up in Redcar in the northeast, which recycles plastic milk bottles. I believe it's 8 out of every 10 milk bottles in the UK that is disposed of will be processed at one of our facilities. And the milk bottles are melted down into flakes for onward transport and reuse. Now, we've recently developed this facility, which is also in the northeast. It was a £15 million investment in new and diversifying our technology for treating plastic milk bottles. Completely bespoke infrastructure in there. Processes around 5 tonnes per hour, and just to give you a feel for it, that's 3 million bottles per day, or over 1 billion bottles per year. So this facility actually was absolutely ideal. It already benefited from planning permission for office and warehouse uses. Very few external alterations were required, and it's sited in a suitable industrial area, well away from any sensitive receptors. So consequently, there are very few restrictive planning conditions on the consent. But these sort of sites are much more challenging to find in the south. Land values particularly, and competition for land can often price us out of the market. Tends to be closer to sensitive receptors, and traffic congestion is also another major issue in the south, as is the availability of units. So moving on, we have a strategic waste management site in West Sussex, a place called Brookhurst Wood, which consists of a range of quite significant waste management technologies. And we've recently been given planning permission for 2 new soil treatment facilities. It's a £3 million investment with a capacity to treat up to 110,000 tonnes of both hazardous and non-hazardous contaminated soils annually. And these are materials that normally are derived from construction projects, but it's material that would otherwise be sent to landfill, and it is able to achieve a nearly 100% recycling rate, with the material coming out of the facilities used in a wide variety of projects. But it was very locally contentious, and we received a number of objections, and we ended up at planning committee, and thankfully we were able to secure planning consent, and we're currently working through the conditions to enable delivery of those sites in the forthcoming year. So I just thought it'd be quite interesting to touch on the coronavirus impact on the waste industry, and inevitably there was a significant impact across the sector, primarily through the closure of offices, restaurants, schools, pubs and bars, and also a reduction in construction activities. And there was a dramatic drop in waste volumes arising across these industrial and commercial sectors. The municipal waste, so that's waste that's collected by local authorities, generally maintained or grew due to increased working from home. But volumes, generally speaking, are now rebounding, not far off pre-pandemic levels. But we're able to maintain services throughout this period, and our frontline staff worked very, very hard, in quite highly risky situations in order to keep delivering those services. And I think that generally speaking, the industry has probably never been so well recognised. Certainly, we've seen kids out in the street clapping at the bin men, or running out of the door, as they have been doing with other key services throughout the time. So hopefully we can build on that, and we can keep raising awareness about the types of technology that are involved, and in managing waste as we're moving forwards into the circular economy. So what next? Well, waste industry, as we've been discussing, is absolutely vital to the post-pandemic economic recovery, particularly as we're moving towards post-pandemic decarbonised ways of managing waste. Throughout this process, we've needed greater flexibility in planning conditions, and generally speaking, we have received really pragmatic approaches from our local authorities. But we'll need to continue that as we have new consents delivered, in order to keep delivering flexibility as we respond to the market recovery. So planning sector needs to keep delivering consents in order to build, but alongside that, the permitting sector also needs to deliver, and there are significant challenges with that at the moment, and probably some reform is needed in order that we can align the two regimes in order to deliver what we need to do in the coming years. I think, yeah, Ian mentioned about the national planning policy for waste, and we're expecting a review of that in due course, maybe this year. We'll see. And there's other planning reforms coming through, say with zoning. Some of you may have heard about that. And the recent amendments to the permitted development order relating to demolition of commercial buildings to be replaced with housing does pose some safeguarding issues. Something to be aware of as we're going forward, that there are a number of sensitive uses within industrial and commercial areas that can be quite heavily impacted on through non-industrial and commercial uses. So we'll wait and see how that pans out in due course, but it's definitely one to keep your eye on. But again, a whistle-stop tour really of the waste industry and planning, and obviously there's time for questions now, so hopefully I can answer anything that you wish to know. But thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, James. I think James has a very good presentation from an industry perspective, and also he helped me to bring the Q&A section now. I have a very good questions regarding on a lot of people, have a lot of discussion, debate on what lesson learned, after the COVID-19 and during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how can we improve our planning system. So in James' presentation, he did come across with some of the point from the industry perspective. I possibly will leave this question to open to all the speakers, especially from Ian and Victoria as well, because they are all very experienced waste planner. And what you guys, you learned from this pandemic, and would you guys expect there will be any change or big development of waste planning? I think possibly I leave it for Ian's, because he is a very experienced waste planner in the sector, and also Victoria. She can also share a bit more a case study, especially your very strong experience in London as well. I leave it for you guys there.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Well, I'll kick off. Yeah, well, personally, it's about getting used to working from home, Jeffrey. No, but seriously, one of the things that it's been rectified now, but was many local planning authorities, not just waste planning authorities, were struggling with at the outset, and this is a process matter. But when you're preparing a local plan, it's how you make documentation available. And in particular, the requirement to make hard copy documentation available in council offices and possibly in libraries and other offices for inspection. So that clearly, all of those facilities closed down, and so clearly that posed a particular problem, not just for waste planning authorities, but for all local planning authorities preparing local plans. But fortunately, we've got new legislation which came in a couple of weeks ago, which means that documents only have to be made available online for inspection. That's at least until 31st December this year. So it's a temporary arrangement. So yeah, that's just a process matter, I guess, preparing, to do with preparing local plans. I think, James has said, I think James, I've spoken to him in the past about this, and he has said that planning authorities have responded well, I believe, to, and it's been about showing flexibility, extending operating hours, allowing perhaps greater storage of waste than would normally be permissible. So yeah, of course, an interesting and a wider thing connected to the circular economy is about how this this pandemic has resulted in a reduction in waste volumes, and I think it will be at the end of the year be quite interesting to see how waste volumes did reduce. And I wonder if any of that will sustain ongoing. People have been doing more cooking from home and less, picking up a sandwich with a wrapper associated with it, for example. Whether we'll see a lasting impact on waste volumes. So yeah, just a few of my thoughts.
Yeah, I would certainly agree about the the planning process. I'm holding on to consult on the North London Waste Plan until I have a little bit more certainty. One of the things that I think has occurred to me as part of the pandemic is how quickly things can change, and therefore how flexible we need to be as planners. So, for example, looking at the type of land that would be suitable for waste facilities may well change in the future as technologies come forward, as we need different sorts of footprints, whether waste facilities would be more sort of on the reprocessing side, all those kind of things. I think we need as planners to be able to plan for flexible uses in the future, and sometimes that can be very difficult, as James mentioned, in the south, with high land values and so on.
Yeah, I think I can probably add just a bit of our experience about how the planning system dealt with the pandemic and what it might look like in the future. But I think as Victoria and Ian said, it's primarily been a process issue recently, and I think big shock at the beginning. Everybody was having to relocate and work out how we were going to deal with things, how authorities going to manage consultations and validating applications. So inevitable delay at the beginning, which was completely understandable, and we worked well with our authorities to try and help where we could. And I think on a practical level, just undertaking things like technical assessments has been hard work. So undertaking a transport assessment for a new development is probably the worst possible time to undertake a transport assessment for a new development. So we have reached to agreements with our authorities about the level of detail that can be supplied for a new planning application in that regard, because we need to have a pragmatic approach, but we still need to ensure that we're able to deliver consents when we're looking to develop plants. So operational hours are a key one while we're managing reduced workforces and trying to increase the numbers of shifts per day. So we're looking to go beyond the hours permitted, and that's generally gone quite well. A high level of understanding from the local authorities generally on these issues. So going forwards, I think we're not out of the woods yet, and I think it'll probably be some time, and I mean, who knows what will happen in the next few months anyway. So I think maintaining that dialogue and level of pragmatism, I think, is going to be absolutely key, and we'll all need to be thinking of new ways of dealing with things as they come up. So flexibility is going to be so helpful for the next 12 to 18 months, I think.
Okay, thank you. I think we move on to the questions. I have a few questions related to landfill. I think this is also a very hot topic in waste planning. I think it's from delegates. Said that there's a demand on having a landfill remain for residual waste and also for a wider region. I mean, the question to the speakers would be how we can promote the regional demand to the unitary planning authority, or how the relevant regulatory bodies can understand and increase the difficulty to achieve the planning application to going forward. I mean, that's the question from the delegates. I think they'll be concerned about the landfill demand. Feel free.
Shall I go first? I know James will want to chip in, and Victoria as well, but I suppose coming from the perspective of the South East Waste Planning Advisory Group, so as chair of that group, I'm very well aware that this has been an issue we've been looking at for several years, and we've published a joint position statement on non-hazardous landfill in the South East. And that was really recognising the fact that, as I mentioned in my presentation, many areas now don't actually have landfills, which is fantastic. That's great news. That's a great success. But what it does mean is that it places perhaps pressure on single areas to accept that they have a landfill development in their area, which will be receiving waste from a wider area. So there can be a sense that the local community feels dumped on, and because they're taking waste, from many miles away, and it has nothing to do with them. So why should they have to put up with it? So this makes it very difficult to plan for. It makes it very contentious. One of the the particular challenges we've got is around duty to cooperate, which Victoria's talked about, and that's key to ensuring that we are making sure that there is sufficient landfill capacity as we're planning forward. And that it is one of those areas that I think if we had regional spatial strategies, dare I say, this is one matter that really ought to be planned for at a regional level. It's a regionally significant infrastructure, and so if we had regional assemblies now, perhaps those are things that's the sort of thing that they could be looking at. James.
I'll
Victoria.
I'll just add on the duty to cooperate. One of the things that's missing when you're trying to deal with a regional issue from waste planning authority to waste planning authority is some of the very big strategic projects. So I'm talking about Crossrail, HS2, all that kind of thing, are missed out from the conversation, and that's where the a regional body would be much more helpful in these types of things. So landfill is a good example of why we need regional planning.
Yeah, I suppose just to add, I suppose at the end of the day, landfill or disposal is still in the waste hierarchy, albeit it's the least preferred option, but there is always a need to plan for disposal of some kind, and there will be some wastes that will always have to be disposed of by landfill, and the projections for closures of landfill, it's going to be in the next 5 to 6 years, so. The lead time to try and develop a new site, albeit it may be associated with a mineral working, the lead times will be probably quite significant because it's going to be a political hot potato. So it will need to be somewhere, but it's just a question as to where. And I should add as well, we operate landfills, but we're also a recycling company. It's just trying to ensure that all wastes are managed really. Because there will be a gap, and without sufficient energy from waste infrastructure, there will be a shortfall in capacity to deal with these wastes in the next few years.
Good. Okay. I have another question. Another hot topic is climate emergency from a delegates question. The question is, what you guys feel about the key changes we're going forward in light of the council declaration on the climate emergency, especially I think it's on the waste plan. I suppose the question is asking for you guys any thoughts on this one what's related to waste planning. Maybe Victoria, I think you can share about a bit more in the London plan, how is to be corporate climate emergency in the reform on the waste plan.
Yeah, well, I think the circular economy is going to be quite key, obviously, managing more waste further up the waste hierarchy. Renewable energy, in fact, incineration, when you are recovering energy from that, is a potential source of renewable energy. Yeah, so I think the circular economy is going to be key. The GLA are actually doing quite a lot about the circular economy in the London plan, and I think there'll be a test case for the whole of the country to see whether that sort of thing can be rolled out to get developers buy-in to understanding how they can ultimately save costs, save money in their developments.
Yeah, can I just picking up on Victoria's point, and she made this point in her presentation, that the circular economy is it's not just about waste planning, it's about all local planning, all forms of local planning. and it's while as waste planners we can do certain things, it's really important that other local planning authorities are looking at initiatives like requiring circular economy statements in the same way that the GLA do in London for major development. So yeah, you know, I totally agree, but I just want to make that point that if you're preparing a non-waste local plan at the moment, I would advise you to have a look at what's being done in London with the circular economy statements, as Victoria suggested.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think, you know, from my experience recently, we're certainly being asked to do more around emissions in the planning system, and either offsets or, you know, how we're going to be reducing emissions throughout the planning application process. This also comes through the permitting process as well. But I think the two examples I gave in my presentation probably show that we are looking at you know, better ways of managing waste. You know, particularly with the soil treatment plant, that's 110,000 tons of hazardous material that would be landfilled originally, and it's all coming out and it's being reused almost in its entirety. So, you know, these kind of developments are, by their definition, you know, having a better impact on the environment. And I think, you know, the more support we can get for these kind of technologies going forward, then, you know, we'll be able to you know, continue to decarbonize the way that we manage our waste. And I mean, there's also alternative transport options, and you know, I think we are trialing electric refuse collection vehicles now. So you know, there'll be some measures coming forward, and these are all things that are set out in our sustainability strategy. So you know, for some light reading, I would go and have a little look at that.
Good. I think we move on to possibly the last question we have. I mean, there's a several questions related to waste export. There's some of the question asking, the speakers to see what's your view about how can we improve our waste planning system to stop the export of waste, or how, the shipping waste to overseas, it will come into a plan. Especially there's a question about, is it a large portion to be sent now? Possibly you can share your experience about waste export overseas. Possibly from James. I think, James, you work for the waste operator. You definitely have a lot of information on this, maybe.
Yeah, it's not my personal area of expertise, I have to admit. But I think, generally speaking, you know, going forward, obviously this has become a really hot topic since things like Blue Planet 2, you know, really raised awareness, probably quite rightly, about, you know, where the waste is going that is being exported. But generally speaking, it's being, you know, sent to energy from waste plants for spare capacity in Europe, or high quality products being shipped to China paper mills to make recycled paper. I guess the preference would be to manage waste here and be able to take the value of that waste and use it in the UK. But I think particularly with things like paper and cardboard, the capacity isn't there to take it. China has some absolutely gigantic paper mills, and you know, I don't think we have any operational in the UK at the moment. So you know, there is a need, you know, for these kind of facilities, and you know, in the long term, if we're looking to, you know, reduce our exports. But maybe Ian has kind of a better feel for the actual detail. Sorry.
Thanks, James. I don't know if I have a better feel for the detail, but I do have a comment. I don't think it's the planning system that is causing waste to be exported. You know, it's really a question of economics. So, you know, in the past, it's been a hell of a lot cheaper to send waste over to China, remarkably, to recycle, and you know, they've got fed up with receiving our waste, so they essentially put a ban on it, and that's what's driven industry to respond. And I suggest that the plant that James mentioned, the plastics plant in Seaham, you know, is benefiting from that ban, and is perhaps, you know, that was part of the business case, the fact that there weren't opportunities in the South East for recycling plastics. So yeah, I don't know that there's much the planning system can do per se in terms of encouraging, you know, or reducing exports. And you know, in some cases, I think there's refuse-derived fuels being exported to, as James said, capacity in mainland Europe. where it's being used for good quality combined heat and power. So there's some really good facilities over there where they are utilising the heat as well as the power. So I talked about the efficiency of these plants, and they are very, very efficient. So actually, from a carbon perspective, it can work out better to be sending that material to those facilities rather than incinerating them in this country where we're not using the heat.
Yeah, I'd just add two things. Firstly, that we probably need more reprocessing capacity in this country if we're going to export less. And for example, in the North London Waste Plan, we have a policy encouraging that, the sort of co-location aspect of that. And also, I would just say that we hear horror stories about old computers ending up on beaches in Ghana, and there are rules related to that, obviously. But we certainly don't want to be sending waste to countries where there is no waste collection or disposal system. I volunteer for Waste Aid, and they work in countries where there is no waste management system. So we moan and complain about waste management in this country sometimes, but actually we have it pretty good compared to those countries that have absolutely nothing in place.
Thank you very much, speakers. I think that's all for our Q&A section. I mean, I find the section is very useful, especially, for our majority of delegates are non-waste planner. I hope that you guys will find it useful for this section. And even for those of you who are working in the waste planning sector, I hope that you will learn some new ideas and new things throughout the presentation from our speakers and also the discussion with our speakers as well. Once again, I would like to say a thank you to all our speakers to do a very comprehensive and very professional waste planning presentation. We would like you to, a few things before you click on leave that meeting. We need your feedback, so it's very important for us to improve our things and let our speakers know what can be prepared for any other events in the future. So once this webinar is finished, there will be opportunity for you to leave your questions or even the feedbacks there. One very important point is make sure you have subscribed to our RTPI YouTube channel, and because you will be notified all of the RTPI's videos as soon as they are released. And of course, today's webinar, the recording of this section will be going up to the YouTube channel soon. So if you're watching the recording, so please also leave the comments down as well. We would like your thought. For more details on other webinars, because this webinar is part of the RTPI Online Events 2020. For other events webinars, please feel free to go back to our RTPI website under events. It's a very, very friendly reminder. Our booking is quite popular, so please do book in, register before everything is sold out. The last but not least, as a friendly reminder, there's a handout you can be downloaded, which all prepared by all our speakers, all very useful materials for you guys to be familiar with the topic. So please feel free to download the handout. And last but not least, thank you for attending, and I hope that we will see you in our next event. So goodbye.